Hey, what's up guys, and welcome back to another Reddit Stories video. And today we will be going over some scary Appalachian stories from Reddit. And as the title implies and what I just said, this will be some people's first-hand experiences and stories from Appalachia, in that interesting neck of the woods. And I really hope you enjoy this video because I really enjoyed the stories that I picked out for this video, and they are all just super interesting and they're great to listen to when you study, sleep, just work, or just want to watch a scary video. And this video is perfect for all of that. And also please like the video, it helps out a ton. And also please subscribe to the channel. It's the channel's goal to be at 500,000 subscribers, and I think we can do that kind of soon, so please subscribe. And all right, without further ado, let's get into some scary Appalachian stories from Reddit. The Appalachian Horror. I grew up in southern Appalachia, in western North Carolina, 30 minutes outside of the town in Asheville. The hills and hollers of the Appalachian Mountains are some of the oldest mountains in the world, with some of the rock formations dating back over 1 billion years. That quite literally means they were here before there were terrestrial animals. As with most things that have been on the earth for a long time, there were inexplicable anomalies, both benevolent and malevolent. For example, the Brown Mountain Lights. Never in my life have I felt threatened or uneasy when witnessing them from wise man's view. They're neither good nor evil, they just are. On the benevolent side, sometimes when you walk through an abandoned old church up near mom and dad's property line, you can feel good, warm, and happy energy. It's like the first warm day of summer when the sunshine is not too hot, but it's not too cold. Well, this story is not about one such anomaly. It's about something that was definitely malevolent. About a decade ago, I was in night school up at AB Tech, going to school for automotive mechanics. I would go into class about 2 p.m. after I got off my part-time job, and I would end up getting home about 10:30 p.m., depending on traffic. Every night, I drove the same road in my old 1973 W200 Dodge pickup. Some nights, it would get rather boring, and I would take a different route, jump off the I-40 and drive the back roads. On this particular evening, I decided to just stay on I-40 because I just wanted to go home and go to bed. It was Thursday and there was no class on Friday, and I wanted to get in bed early so I'd go out into the woods and go hiking early tomorrow morning and watch the sun come up. As I jumped off I-40 onto the exit where my parents lived, the night seemed to get darker and none of the animals that I could hear through my rolled down windows made any more noise. The cab of my truck became smaller and smaller and my breathing quickened. I've never faced any kind of anxiety in my life, but at that moment something felt off. There was no way I could put my finger on what it was. I came to a stop on the exit ramp, turned to go down the road, and I happened to notice that the gas station off the exit where mom and dad lived had no lights on. They were a 24-hour truck stop, and I always had lights on. But I didn't think about it again after noticing. I just chalked it up to the power being out, but I could not shake the feeling that something was definitely askew. I slowly shifted through all my old truck's gears, not wanting to make any more noise than an old pickup already did. I leaned over my steering wheel to look up at the moon through the windshield, and there were barely any stars visible, which was way out of the ordinary. If you've ever been to Appalachia, primarily the sparsely populated areas where I'm from, you can see the Milky Way on clear nights. An absence of stars back home is only due to clouds cover or whatever in the hell went on this particular night. As I rounded a particularly sharp left-hand curve and chugged through a straight stretch before the next right-hander, I looked at the ancient, decaying barn I always gazed at when riding that stretch of road and thought about how long that thing had been there and how many advancements in civilization it had seen. For the split second that my gaze wandered, a very large, sickly-looking dog ran out in front of my truck, no more than 10 feet in front of me. Old Betsy was a good truck, but she didn't stop well. Thump thump. I heard the fence posts I had left in my truck bounce up out of my bed and then back into it as I slid to a stop. My first thought was, oh god, now I have to go tell these neighbors that I ran over their dog. That shit doesn't go real far with people around here. It can really kind of set them off depending on the dog and the person. As I sat there breathing in the smell of burning rubber, something else found its way into my nose. The stench of rotting flesh. It's not a smell you ever forget once you smell it the first time. I didn't pay much attention to it at the time. I just chalked it up to some rotting roadkill nearby. Finally, I thought to myself, let me go check and see who this dog belongs to. I pushed my clutch in, shifted to reverse, and as I looked in my rearview mirror, illuminated by the haunting glow of my reverse lamps, was the same dog, only it wasn't on four legs anymore. It had stood up like a man well over 10 feet tall. Only then did it dawn on me that the front of my truck was every bit of 5 feet tall, and this dog was every bit of 5 feet tall at the shoulder, on all fours. As it turned its head to look in the direction of my truck, I caught only a glimpse of this creature. It was not a dog, it was not a man, it was somewhere in between, and at the same time entirely separate altogether. Its skin hung loose off of it, its emaciated and thin frame like a raccoon. Bits of matted fur and dirt and mud clung to its legs like a disease. The right arm seemed a little longer than the left, and they both hung abnormally low, in relation to either animal this creature seemed to be. As it regained its senses, it turned and looked into the mirror like it knew exactly where I was sitting. The face was that of a man's, but the very edges of its face seemed to not be totally defined. They seemed to move and change like something you would see at a cellular level in a scientific documentary. There were no eyes, but only sockets, where eyes should have been. No hair, and the skin that was dripping off its face was cold, lifeless gray color. The nose was short and shoved into its face like a bulldog, but the teeth still haunt me. It was definitely carnivorous, and true to form of the rest of its unnatural look, many of the teeth didn't seem to be arranged in a natural way in its mouth. They seemed to fill and spill forth from the indefinable face, almost like they knew the horror they occupied, and they were searching for a way out. It stared through my life, into my eyes and past my soul. It seemed like an eternity, but it could not have been more than 5 seconds that I sat there, paralyzed. A light came on at a house next to the road, causing the creature to snap its gaze in that direction and tear off into the woods on its back 2 legs, like a man. I jammed my old truck in first gear and roasted tires all the way through first, snatched onto second gear, and drove as fast as I could home. When I got to the house, both of my parents were asleep. I went downstairs into my bedroom and loaded every firearm I possessed and locked all the doors. I couldn't wake them up. Who the fuck would believe that at 10:30 on a Thursday night? The basement was eerily quiet that night. Even their dogs that got up to raise hell at outside animals at all hours of the night were dead silent. The old post and beam house didn't even creak or pop that night, as was usual. At around 3 a.m., I started to finally get drowsy, and as I went to lay my head down to get some sleep, so I could still attempt to go hiking the next morning, I smelled the stench of death again. It was faint at first, but it was definitely there. I thought to myself, here's going crazy. None of that shit was real. But as I dwelt on it, I became more and more noticeable until it filled the entire basement. My dad has a home office in the basement with 2 large glass doors that face Pisgah National Forest, an impenetrable 500,000 acre woods. I finally worked up the courage to walk out of my bedroom and into the basement living room with my little tactical 12 gauge, loaded, tack light on. I covered the flashlight with my hand so as not to make my presence known until need be, and as I turned right out of the living room into my father's office, I shined the light through the glass doors. At the edge of the woods, there stood the creature. It was motionless. It stared right into the light, unafraid, with those soulless sockets, devoid of eyes. I quickly covered my tactical light, ran into the living room, flipped on the outdoor floodlights, and to my surprise, it was no longer standing at the edge of the woods. But between the house and the edge of the woods, still motionless, I swung the door open and fired every round I had in its direction. I must have scored a couple of hits because it screeched an unearthly scream, like that of a woman being slaughtered, as it took off into the woods. The dogs went crazy. Mom and Dad woke up asking me what the hell was going on. I told them that a bear had gotten to the trash and I was scaring it away. They didn't believe me, but I knew they wouldn't believe the truth either. I didn't sleep that night, or any time until the following Sunday. Everything seemed to return to normal. I didn't think about that creature again until I met my wife about 6 years later. Her mother's house sits at the mouth of the holler, no more than 4 or 5 miles up the road from my mother and father's. Up on the side of the holler, there are kennels for her brother's hunting dogs, no longer in use, and haven't been in years. But the fence is still there, and the concrete pad is still there. It's a thing of great use when he needs to quarantine an animal. Her Great Pyrenees had gotten into a tussle with a raccoon, which of course he destroyed, but his rabies vaccination had lapsed, so we had to keep him quarantined for a time. It didn't bother him, he kind of liked solitude. This particular night that we were coming home from a movie date in the neighboring town was the last night of quarantine for him. So we walked up the last trail using our phone flashlights to get to the kennel, and there he sat, patiently waiting, tail wagging, happy to see us. We put him on a leash and started walking back to the house with him. As we were walking back through the darkness, I started to feel the same feeling I had felt that night I hit the creature in my truck. I didn't say anything so as not to alarm my wife, and then the smell came wafting in the breeze. She jokingly asked me, "My God, what did you eat? You stink." I half-assed laughed, not being able to fully appreciate the joke for the horrors that raged within my mind. She immediately caught on and asked me what was wrong, to which I could only reply, "I'll tell you later." She grew up in the woods and around hunting and things of that nature her whole life, so she knew what I meant. She knew we were being watched by something. When we could see the lights of the house from the trail to the kennel, we heard it. There came barking from the kennel that sounded just like the Great Pyrenees we had on a leash next to us. It was a perfect imitation. The Pyrenees became a guardian dog immediately, sensed that something was wrong, and so he turned to face the danger, belting out deep barks and growls in that direction. I don't know if you've ever had to drag a 150-pound dog, but it sucks. It is no easy task. I'm 6 feet tall and 240 pounds, and it was all I could do to get him back to the house. The barking never ceased the entire time we were running towards the house. In fact, it seemed to grow closer and closer until it seemed it was coming from inside my own head. Her mother heard the commotion and flipped the floodlights on as we made it into the fence of the yard, and I caught a glimpse of something coming to a dead stop at the end of where the light reached, wheeling around and tearing back into the darkness. My wife looks at me and goes, "You want to tell me what the fuck that was?" To which I replied, "Yes, let's go inside." I told her the story and she listened intently, hanging on every word. Her family came from a long line of granny witches and other supernatural healers of the Appalachians, so her older sister came over the next morning with some herbs and chants to bless the property and to ward off evil. I suggested we go up to the dog kennels and do them as well. When we got to the kennels, they were completely destroyed. The very concrete foundation was cracked, and the chain link fence was torn off its post. The dog houses were destroyed, and the place reeked of the stench that followed the creature. My wife's older sister just went about her business like normal, blessed the place, burned some herbs, and led us back onto the property. When we got in the house, she wheeled up on us suddenly and instructed us very firmly to never go into the woods after dark. Not until this thing left me alone. To make a long story short, my wife joined the military, and she ended up getting stationed in Delaware. Well, as someone who's lived around fairly large mountains and endless wilderness this entire life, Delaware is pretty terrible. At least that was my thought when we first moved into the middle of a 50,000 plus population city. Fortunately, though, it didn't take us long to find a house in a sleepy little community further south. We purchased the house and moved in with haste. We were both very grateful and glad to be out of the city and into a rural setting again. The land in Delaware seems lifeless in comparison to Appalachia. The sparsely populated woods don't possess any energy that goes on one way or another. The ground doesn't seem to be alive like it is in Appalachia. Having not thought about the creature in a long time, I resumed my staying outside after dark and playing with her dogs in a rather large yard that borders a small patch of woods. Well, last night I went outside to play with the dogs, and as dark sat in it, I built a decent-sized fire in my fire pit and consumed some good old-fashioned Appalachian mountain cough syrup from a mason jar. And just as the fire was dying down, my American bulldog tore off towards the woods. He has a habit of running off to go on adventures, so my immediate instinct was to chase him down in the yard and tackle him so he could not get away. As I tackled his 110-pound ass to the ground and threw him in the fireman's carry over my shoulders, I heard him begin to bark. Only the bark was not coming from him. The only sound coming from him was a deep rumbling growl, a noise I've never heard him make. It was a threatening noise. Something was definitely wrong, and as I ran with him on my shoulders back to the house, the stench of death again began to fill the air. The two other dogs must have caught wind of what was happening and met me at the back door, which I threw open, slammed shut, locked, and again loaded my firearms. How the hell could this thing have followed us 650 miles up here? As I flipped my floodlights on, at the back side of my house, several of the bushes and small trees at the forest edge were still shaking like something had just run through them. My dogs went crazy all night, barking and howling and attempting to get out the windows. I didn't sleep a bit. I don't think I will for a while. I know for sure I won't be in the woods after dark ever again in my life. Not until this thing is gone. My girlfriend and I were chased by a satanic cult in the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia. This happened in the summer of 2017. My girlfriend and I are from St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada. We both attended university there and decided to take a road trip through the United States to celebrate our graduation. Our destination was Miami, Florida. Her family owns a condo near the beach, so we had a free place to stay. We decided to drive instead of fly because we wanted to see a bit of the country on the way down and visit a few friends. The trip usually takes about 20 to 24 hours by car, non-stop. We were planning on making multiple stops. The first part of the road trip was a wonderful experience. We went shopping in Buffalo, then made our way to Pittsburgh and managed to catch a Pirates game. However, once we hit West Virginia, things changed. It was nothing but endless wilderness and a few small towns sprinkled in between. We had plans to meet up with some friends for dinner in Charlotte, North Carolina, so we wanted to get through West Virginia ASAP. We only made stops when we absolutely had to. We ended up stopping for gas at a pretty remote spot. My girlfriend and I got out of the car. I started pumping gas and she went inside to use the washroom and pick up some snacks. My tank was about half full when I heard a voice behind me ask, "Y'all lost?" I looked behind me and I saw a middle-aged white man with long, messy brown hair that reached down to his shoulders, and an unkempt beard with dashes of grays and what looked like to be dried up mucus. His clothes were torn and up and dirty, and he smelled like a mixture of beer, sweat, pee, and feces. He was a little overweight, but pretty tall. I'm 6 foot, and he was about 4 inches taller than me. The teeth he still had left were a yellowish brown. On his right cheek, just under his eye, was a tattoo of some kind of pentagram. I'm pretty into YouTube videos about true crime and cults, so I was able to recognize what it was pretty quickly. He was standing very close to my face, to the point where the smell of his breath was making me dizzy, so I backed up. No, sir. Just passing through," I said nervously. "Not too often we see tourists passing through these parts," he responded. "Where are you headed?" As he said this, he moved even closer than he was before. I had my back up against my car, and I couldn't move back any further. I wanted to get away from this guy as quickly as possible, but the car was still filling up with gas, and my girlfriend was still inside the gas station. I didn't want this dude to know where we were really going, so I told him I was visiting family in Kentucky, and they were expecting us. After I said this, he cracked a weird half smile, opening his mouth just wide enough for me to get a look at his teeth again. I'll never forget that face. His bloodshot eyes were staring deep into my soul. He let out a weird and sinister laugh. "How lovely," he said. "I'll see you kids around." Then he walked away. I was very relieved that he walked away, but also terrified by his last remarks. I didn't even see him when we pulled up to the gas station, so how did he know I wasn't alone? I figured he must have been watching my girlfriend and I when we arrived. The car was finally filled up, and I saw my girlfriend walking towards the car with bags full of snacks for the road. I noticed the weird guy was still at the gas station. He was a few pumps away from us, leaning up against an old red pickup truck, but to my utter discomfort, he wasn't alone. There were 2 other men and 1 woman with him, making the group 4 in total. The 2 men were just as big as he was, but they had shaved heads. One of them was wearing a dirty white tank top, and the other had no shirt on at all. The woman was shorter, about 5'5". She was very skinny with heavy bags under her eyes and long blonde hair. They all looked like they had been living in the woods for the past 10 years. They were staring and pointing at us, talking amongst themselves. As soon as my girlfriend got to the car, I urgently told her to get in. I'm usually a pretty calm guy, so when my girlfriend noticed I was kind of freaking out, she knew something was up. We quickly entered the car, I locked the doors, and I began hauling ass out of the gas station. As we pulled around their red truck to the exit, I noticed there was another pentagram painted on the hood. I also noticed the skull of a goat or ram on their windshield. The 4 people began getting into their truck as they saw us leaving. I knew they were going to follow us as soon as we left. I explained the situation to my girlfriend as we were speeding away from the gas station. We were zooming down the road, and I looked in my rearview mirror. As I expected, the red truck was right behind us. I sped up even more, and they did too. I made a left, they did too. I made a full U-turn, and they did as well. My girlfriend managed to get reception and dialed 911. We gave the operator our location, and they gave us directions to the nearest police station. The operator also asked for the license plate, but the truck didn't have any. Once we were off the phone with them, my girlfriend stuck her cell phone outside of the window and started pointing to it, letting the creeps know that we called the police. They finally got the message and stopped following us. We arrived at the police station and filed a report. We gave them the description of the truck and the suspects. The investigators said they would call us if they had any more information. We were extremely shaken but also relieved. All we wanted to do at that point was get the hell out of West Virginia. We thought we had shaken the group for good, but unfortunately, we were wrong. We decided to drive through the night to cover as much ground as possible. The area of Appalachia we were in had no streetlights, and I could only see what my headlights allowed me to see. Everything was fine until I noticed 2 headlights in my rearview mirror. At first, I didn't think anything of it, but I kept an eye on them. The headlights got closer and closer until they were tailgating us. To my complete shock and horror, it was the same red truck from the gas station. These people had somehow found us again and were right behind us. "It's them," I yelled. My girlfriend began to freak out and dialed 911. I floored the gas pedal, not even knowing what was 10 meters in front of me. All we cared about was escaping. We got a mile up the road until my girlfriend yelled, "Watch out." There were 3 dead cows blocking the narrow road. I slammed on the brakes. The red truck was right behind us, and we couldn't go forward. We knew we fell into a trap. All of a sudden, a naked man wearing a goat mask darted from out the woods and began hitting our car with what looked like a large axe. The naked man got on the hood of our car and started making cheap noises. My girlfriend was still on the phone with 911, but all she could do was scream. The people behind us got out of the red truck and began walking toward our car. 2 of them had rifles, and one of them had a large machete. I knew what I had to do. I put the car into reverse and floored it. The naked man fell off our car. We smashed into the truck, and I managed to knock it into a ditch. After the truck was out of the way, I pulled the fastest U-turn of my life, and we got out of there. The people were yelling all kinds of obscenities at us as we drove away. I drove as fast as I could away from these people until we finally arrived in a town and filed another police report. My girlfriend and I were uninjured, thankfully, but we were extremely traumatized. The car was still drivable after that, so we were able to get the fuck out of West Virginia the next morning. The entire experience made my girlfriend and I scared to do any more road trips. I still call the local police department in West Virginia once in a while to see if they have any leads on these people, but so far they have not found anything. The fact that these people were able to find us after we went to the police station and drove far away still scares and baffles me to this day. Who knows what kind of sick and twisted things this cult had planned if they managed to catch us. Stay safe out there, everyone. I was told you guys over here might like my story about camping in the Appalachians. I posted this as a reply to an Ask Reddit question and was told you guys might enjoy it, so enjoy reading about one of the most nerve-wracking experiences of my life. A few years back, my girlfriend and I, having hiked several other parts of the Appalachian Trail, decided we wanted to give the southern portion of Virginia's trail a shot. It is about 166 miles long and runs through George Washington and Jefferson National Forest from Roanoke County to Pearisburg in Gillies County. This is definitely one of the more remote and less traveled parts of the trail, which is exactly what we were looking for. We gathered our gear and made our way to the start of the Virginia Creeper Trail to begin our journey. We had planned our journey to end at Damascus and figured that by the time we got there, we would be more than ready to get home to our own beds. It was early October, and the changing of the leaves and colors were amazing. The air was crisp and cool, perfect hiking weather with beautiful scenery. The majority of the trip was pretty uneventful, just your typical hike, but our last couple of nights is where things got weird. On this portion of the trail, you were supposed to camp on the trail or a designated shelter. We didn't really want to run into other people and didn't want anyone coming up on us in the middle of the night. We decided to ignore those suggestions and find our own little spot off the trail. A little searching around and we found a spot a little ways off the trail in the middle of a small clearing. It was perfect. We set up camp, cooked some food, talked for a while, then snuggled up and went to sleep for the night. Somewhere around 2 a.m. I was awoken by my girlfriend shaking me awake, telling me, "Get your gun. Someone is outside walking around her tent." She informed me that she woke up to what sounded like someone right outside the tent running a knife or something along the side while circling us. When hiking, I carry a 1911 and a judge with me. You never know exactly who or what you might run into when on such a long hike in a remote location. I got the judge out of my pack, and then we sat silently listening for any sounds. A few minutes of nothing but the breeze blowing through the trees, and then I heard it. Snap. Crunch. Snap. Someone or something walking in the woods behind our tent. I got the flashlight and silently made my way out of the tent. Our fire had went out, so it was nearly pitch black, illuminated only by the dim glow of the October moon. I told my girlfriend to stay put while I checked it out. I didn't flick the flashlight on right away so as to not give away that I was out of the tent and to have become a shining beacon of my location. Instead, I waited to hear some more noises. After a few minutes, snap, crunch, crack, it sounded like it was a bipedal based on the way the steps were paced. I turned on the flashlight and flooded the area with light. I thought I saw someone move behind a tree. I yelled out and told them to go away and that I was armed. I kept the light on the area with my gun drawn and slowly approached towards the area where I thought I saw the figure. Then, from my right, I hear what sounded like someone running away through the woods. I spin and face my light that way, and then from the original spot, hear who or whatever was there take off into the woods. There's no way I'm giving chase, so I return to the campsite. I told my girlfriend about what happened, and I end up sitting guard outside the tent, in the darkness, until daybreak. In the morning, I looked around a bit for signs of who or whatever it was. I discovered a boot print in some soft, moist dirt not far from our tent. It wasn't mine, and it wasn't my girl's. This freaked me out as it confirmed that someone, perhaps more than one, was skulking around our tent in the dark. I kept it to myself because I didn't want to freak my girl out any more than she already was. At this point, we were pretty deep in and still had 2 days left. That day, we walked a little faster than normal and covered as much ground as possible. When it came time to set up camp, I found a spot near a cliff where we could place the tent in a small overhang and prevent anyone from coming up behind us. The whole day up to this point, I had a feeling we were being followed. I had no confirmation of this as I hadn't seen or heard anyone else, but it was just a gut feeling. We set up camp and made some food, then retreated to the tent. I gave my girl the 1911 and I kept the judge right next to me, and I assured her that if I slept at all, it should be with one eye open. After a while, she drifted off to sleep and I stayed awake listening to the sounds of the woods at night. I was awake for a few hours, just waiting to see if anything was going to happen. At some point, I guess my exhaustion caught up with me and I drifted off. I woke sometime later to what sounded like someone going through our stuff outside the tent. I grabbed my gun and woke my girlfriend, shushing her to be quiet. From the faint glow of the fire, I could see someone's silhouette against the tent. There was really someone out there. I yelled out to them something along the lines of, "We are armed. Get the fuck out of here." They dropped what they were doing and bolted. I came out of the tent, gun drawn and ready to shoot someone. Our stuff was strewn all about. They had rummaged through quite a bit of our stuff. I walked to the edge of the woods in the direction whoever was out there had fled. There was a creek nearby, and I walked to the edge, where there was a small trail running alongside it. Down the creek, I could see a light. It looked like a lantern the way it flickered. Then I saw 3 more emerge from the other side of the woods. I told my girlfriend to start packing up whatever she could and that we were leaving now. We packed up everything of value, left the tent and a few other items, and headed back onto the trail. In the middle of the night, I kept hearing people talking off in the woods and hearing branches snap for quite some ways. I kept looking behind us every few seconds to make sure nobody was coming up on us. It was completely nerve-wracking. If something happened, we were still a long ways from anywhere, and quite literally on our own. Since we hadn't seen another hiker the entire time we had been out here, I really felt we were in serious danger. We had been walking for quite some time when I heard something in the woods behind us. As we rounded a corner, I turned around and saw someone step out onto the trail and just stand there watching us. It was just as the sun was coming up and barely any light. I couldn't make out any features, just the silhouette. I stopped and looked at them for a second and asked them who they were and what they wanted. They just stood there silently, watching us, and then turned and walked back into the woods. We picked up the pace and kept going, looking back every so often. We didn't see them again, but my gut told me they were still there for quite a ways. We eventually reached the end of the trail and got to where we had parked my girlfriend's car, extremely exhausted. We made it out of the Virginia woods without becoming a meal for a clan of cannibalistic inbred hillbillies, which is what I pictured happening in my head the whole time. I have no idea who they were or what they wanted. Maybe it was someone just messing with us. Maybe it really was a clan of deformed hillbillies who were hunting us. I will never know, because I will not be returning to find out. And all right, before we get into this next one, this is a post and a lot of different people reply to this specific post and question. So I will just be reading a bunch of replies to this post. And the post reads, "What is the scariest/most uncanny experience you have had in the Appalachian Mountains?" So I'll just be reading the replies from this one. First reply from Tricky Attention 466. "I'm from SWVA, Southwest Virginia. And one day I was driving down a gravelback road just riding around when I came up on a group of 10 plus people in white robes. They're walking down the road towards the creek. I put it in reverse and got out of there pretty quickly. But in hindsight, I'm pretty sure it was just people performing a baptism down by the creek." Blues with Bear. I'll make a shorter story from a longer one involving sensitive auras, but once I was with a girl on Big Frog Mountain at dusk, miles away from anyone. We decided to walk up a trail when right behind the car, I stepped in a mud pile with odd-looking light brownish water. I pointed the unusual color to her, then we started walking. Not far up the trail, she started getting scared and went back to the car. In the car, we started making out while lying in the front seat, and she had her hand draped on the window. I felt an odd sensation in my back. It had happened before when people were behind me, and told her to pull her hand, which she did. A few minutes later, I felt the sensation in my back again, but it felt more urgent. I rolled her window up, but being a horny-ass teenager, continued with the makeout session. A few minutes later, it felt like someone had stuck a live wire in my back. I sat up, started the car, and headed back down the mountain. She was obviously confused and asked me what was wrong. I replied that I didn't know, but something was wrong somewhere. We went back to my parents' house and was assured by them the family was okay. Having calmed down some, we ate a little dinner, then started to leave. After I opened the car door for her, I walked around the back of the car. While walking, I glanced at the back of the car and saw handprints, the same color of the mysterious mud puddle on the car. The last one was over the back window, and it was obvious someone was watching us while inching their way to the front driver's side window. When I saw the handprints, it was like being hit with a lightning bolt. I knew what had happened. Cold chills ran all over me. I got her out of the car, and as soon as she saw the prints, she knew too. This story is the absolute truth, so help me, and I will never forget it. Undead_octopus. My name's Octo. I'm from Michigan, and I love Appalachia. The mountains are in my blood, not to mention it's the most beautiful place on earth. My grandfather and many generations of my family before him was from Boone County, West Virginia. Anyway, the preamble is mostly irrelevant, but that's the reason I'm in this subreddit. Anyway, this story doesn't entirely take place in Appalachia, but could have easily ended there. A few years ago, one of my friend's parents paid me to pick their daughter up from New York City and bring her back to Detroit because she is somewhat disabled and she had missed a few Greyhounds that they had booked for her. The drive to New York City was relatively uneventful, got pulled over for having an out headlight, slept in my car at a rest stop, and woke up in western Pennsylvania to a misty mountain sunrise. I got to New York. The traffic sucked and there was nowhere to park, but eventually I found my friend. She loaded her stuff into my trusty HHR and we were off. Pretty much everything was going alright until we decided that we should stop and rest, again in the mountains of western PA. Initially we chose a Walmart parking lot so we could get food, have access to a bathroom, and so that if something did happen to us, there would be cameras, but there would be a few shady cars that seemed to take interest in us, so we decided to push west and sleep at a rest stop instead. We tried that. When we got there, we had some snacks and just bullshitted till dark so we could safely go to sleep, but then I noticed something. There was a car sitting in the parking lot of the rest stop that looked eerily similar to one of those shady cars we had seen earlier. A newer Jeep brand SUV. White. I debated for a few minutes whether we should worry about it since there were probably tons of people who drive those before deciding to keep pushing west. Exhausted, barely able to drive, potentially paranoid but motivated to find somewhere safe to sleep. Eventually, we found another Walmart and parked somewhere distant from the door, but not so distant that we were invisible. Talked, bullshitted, and eventually were almost asleep. Until another white Jeep Compass pulled up right next to us. I saw his eyes and I'll never forget them. They were cold but hateful, barely awake. I slammed the transmission from park to drive and floored it, heading straight for the highway. Eventually, we decided to get off and try to lose him by zigzagging and changing roads, heading southwest instead of due west, as he probably presumed we were doing. After daybreak, we found ourselves in a small town with a busy Wendy's or McDonald's or something where we finally got some sleep. That night, I was either paranoid as all hell, which is entirely feasible, or we were followed for well over 100 miles. Either way, it was the most terrifying thing to happen to me in the mountains so far. Strong excitement, 35. Didn't happen to me, but happened to my mom in the late 60s. My mother grew up in New Hampshire but was born in Virginia. One year when she was about 4, she was getting dressed in her snow clothes to go outside. She had a younger brother at this point when he was 3. My grandmother, her mom, would dress her and then go and dress her brother, and by the time she got back, my mom would have taken off all her snow clothes. So to fix this, she dressed my mom and stuck her outside with the dog right after. My mom just wandered off into the forest. They lived pretty much in the middle of nowhere at this point. The dog went with her, and then she was missing for 2 days. The dog returned home. They thought she was dead. And then they found her a couple miles away, sitting at the bottom of a hill, covered in dirt and just plain in the snow. She doesn't remember what happened, but I guess she was just missing and then found. Even though there were tons of search efforts the 2 days that she was missing, and like dogs and everything. And she was also missing a lot of her snow clothes, which were never found. Always gives me chills whenever she or my grandmother talks about it. Alright, this is going to be another post, and this question was people who have done a multi-day hiking trip, such as the Appalachian Trail. What is your horror story from the trip? And the first one I will be reading is from user Stider14484. Night 1 of a trip at Sleeping Giant in Canada, I believe. First night out. I'm always a little jumpy because it takes a while to get used to the sounds of the woods, and this was no exception. It was a solo trip, so just me in a little tent on the edge of the forest, looking out onto a small slope down onto a pebble beach. I was having some real trouble getting to sleep. The woods were just so loud and my mind kept jumping to serial killer instead of normal wildlife. I was trying to convince myself otherwise when I hear some heavier footsteps, breaking twigs. My heart is in my throat because I just know I'm going to die all alone in the Canadian backwoods. Then I hear a crash and some falling rocks directly outside my tent, and I work up the courage to turn on my flashlight and unzip the door to have a look. At which point I catch the glimpse of the very clumsy woodland elk that had just fallen down the slope onto the beach right in front of me. Didn't die. Uranus be cold. I was on a canoe camping trip on a long, narrow lake. My wife and I had set up camp about halfway along the lake, and all was well. After dark, I went to wash my face in the lake, and I see 2 lights on the other side of the lake. It was only about 50 meters wide. As I'm watching, their headlamps fade and die, and then something big started snorting over there. A moose or bear? It was pretty loud. It was a still night, and so I called out to him, "Hey, are you alright?" Turns out they had accidentally started hiking from the wrong parking lot, delaying them an hour or 2. And then when they got to the lake, they had hiked down the wrong side of the lake. So I offered, and then went and picked them up in my canoe, and lent them a flashlight so they could set up. I think they were pretty relieved to have gotten away from whatever animal that was. If I hadn't been there, that would have been hours of hiking to get to the next campsite, without lamps. The Quickness Inc. Day 3 of 5 was at a waterfall. There were a few large flat rocks, maybe 500 feet from the base of the falls, that were large enough to fit a tent. So that's what me and my tent mate did. It rained that evening. The rock we pitched on was raised from the surrounding river by a few feet when we set up camp, but the river quickly swelled once the rain started. To complicate things, the wind coming off the falls was pushing the falls facing wall of the tent in by about a foot or so, and rain was pouring horizontally through the space where the 2 zippers meet. At one point during the storm, I stepped out with the intent of moving our packs to higher ground, and while I was doing so, my tent mate decided to get a look at the situation as well. Well, as soon as he stepped out, the tent instantly caught a gust of wind and was swallowed by the river, sleeping bags and all. Luckily for us, there was a few solo guys in our group with extra room in their tents, but sleeping in a cramped 1.5 person tent with no sleeping bag or pads is not a fun experience to say the least. The following morning, we were able to fish our tent and lost gear off the river rocks below. The tent was a complete loss as both the rods were snapped in multiple sections and our sleeping bags and gear were waterlogged. We had to hit the trail though in order to make it to our next destination by nightfall, so we had no choice but to pack everything up and hike with all the extra weight. Somehow, we made it to our destination shortly after lunch and were blessed with a sunny, grassy clearing and an awesome dude in our party who thought to bring rope so we could string a clothesline and dry out all our gear before the evening. I learned a few valuable lessons on that trip. 1. Don't camp in the middle of a river. 2. Lash your tent down. 3. Bring rope because it's just handy to have. 4. The other people in your party might have to save your dumbass one day, so be humble. 5. Get a camp towel. A full-size terry cloth beach towel was like 20 pounds when soaking wet, and I would have done anything to yeet that thing off the side of a cliff if I had been a littering asshole. Wing sauce 7-Eleven. One day, fresh out of college with no friends in the area, I hiked a rough, unmarked herding trail in the mountains was somewhat familiar with on a hot August day by myself. It followed along a beautiful stream lined with spruce trees and tall grass along the banks. Very picturesque. It was a designated wilderness area with few official recreational trails nearby. However, because it was in the tall grass and I wore pants, worried about ticks, I got hot really fast, sweating up a storm. I came to a nice bend in the riverway out in no man's land. I stopped at this point and decided that the river was looking extra inviting, so I stripped down to nothing and waded into the water. Wasn't worried about anyone stumbling upon me, as no one really knew about this trail. The water was ice cold and deeper than I thought, but totally worth it. After cooling down sufficiently, I decided to go see what was around the river bend. Wading through the water at chest deep, I was relatively silent. Got closer to the bend and peered around a corner slowly. Saw more spruce trees, a rock, then another small spruce tree, and next to that, a giant bull moose in the water having a nice drink. I froze. He was less than 50 feet from me, and he didn't know I was there because I was so silent. Trying my hardest not to make a sound while also panicking, I slowly but quickly turned around in the water and rushed back to shore trying not to make a sound. Except every time I exhaled, I said, "I don't want to die," under my breath for some reason. I think it was a slight panic attack as I was alone deep in the woods naked in the water with a bull moose. I got back to shore, gathered my clothes, and ran totally naked through the woods for quite a distance before stopping to at least put shoes and underwear on. Continued running until I got out of the woods and back to my car and sat there until the shaking stopped and I could drive home. And alright guys, that wraps up the scary Appalachian stories from Reddit. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you liked it, please give it a like. If you didn't like it, let me know what I can do to improve in the comments below. And yeah, thank you so much for watching to the end of the video. Comment some video ideas down below, and until next time, see ya.